this is time for free your mind and your soul. Yo, half the story has never been told. Ladies, you got to demand what you want, and what we want is respect, right? Yo, this is up on the track, I know so you have to deal with it right. Freedom every time for the sisters. Check this. Watch this.
Here we go now. Listen, if I'm boom boom rule, I be the ruler like Slick Rick. Get with this quick witted Adidas wearing chick. Papa got a brand new bag. Mama got a brand new Jag. Or go tag. I ain't no old hag. I represent not only in the kitchen, in the bedroom, but also in the boardroom. So give me more room. Deny my opportunity. You in jeopardy. Yo, set me free. Don't hinder me. Let me be.
I'm fighting for freedom. I got the heat in case you need them. Straight soldier. Ain't nobody told ya. Hold up on them lies. I know your games and your plans.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Book Slam Extra. I am your host, Jules. I hope you have had a fabulous week. I have. Thank you very much for asking. We've got a very delightful show tonight. We're going to talk about how we do research and how we use specific bits of information within our writing and whether it's relevant or not to actually sort of, I don't know, shopping list some of it or not. I am an author of dark fantasy. I also write children's books as well. I dabble in a little bit of poetry. My dark fantasy series is basically centered on trauma recovery with a sort of dark fantasy backdrop with some mental health issues added in with sword and sorcery and Dungeons and Dragons and all of that. Well, without further ado, I'm going to invite my lovely co-host. Hang on a second.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Jules.
Apologies for this.
You look
It's
fabulous.
really hot
Cut
here.
it out. You look fabulous. Stop that.
It's
So hi.
hot.
I'm
How are you?
Adam Andrews Johnson. Good. Yeah. I've written 3 books, the Mantis variant series, and check this out. I've got my very first proof copy of my hardcover, and I love it. It's gorgeous. Look at that. And this is all 3 books, book 1, 2, and 3 all together. So it's like a trilogy edition. I love it. I'm pretty excited. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So gorgeous. Love it. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. And it's horror, it's twisted, it's dystopia, it's grimdark. Lots of people hunting each other. That's the story. And I've also got a queer norm fantasy with lots of heavy issues like human sexuality and gender identity and all sorts of stuff like that. And Jules' company, Daniel Books, is releasing it next year. So we're excited about that. 2024. Woo!
Very, very, very excited. And I still have a very excited editor. Is enjoying her read through, should we say? We're talking tonight. The title of the video today is Research for Fiction Writing, Techniques for Finding and Using Information Effectively in Our Writing. I thought this would be quite a nice one because everyone has their own way of researching and not everyone's way will work for everybody. And I think it's an important aspect of research. Important aspect of writing because, that little tinkling noise you can hear in the background is my dog.
Hello, Buddy. Is that Buddy? Is that who it is?
Buddy, indeed.
Buddy.
Yeah.
Hi, Buddy.
He's by the plant pot at the moment. He's brought his bowl up, which is
He's just clanging his bowl around. Yeah, no.
Yeah. I know he has been fed, but he's just like, I'm going to bring it up anyway for safekeeping. No one can have this. So I think a lot of people have this misunderstanding that when you write fiction, it is literally just from here onto a page, and they seem to be under the illusion that that's all it is. So I thought it'd be quite nice to delve a little bit into how people do their research, what they look for. That could be them I cannot speak today. Webbed into their book. Yeah. And to also look at, the differences that everybody has, because not everyone will do it the same. Some people will use just purely the internet. Some people will talk to people. Some people will use other books. Some people will read other people's books. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way. It's just different for every person, isn't it? So, what do you normally do when you're doing your research for your Grim Dark series, for example?
Okay. Specifically for the Mantis books. Yeah. I did a lot of research into specifically places like really dense cities in third world countries. I wanted it to feel overcrowded, overpopulated, like the buildings were all sort of toppling over each other. I actually did a lot of research on the late 80s, early 90s in New York City. I grew up not far from there, and I remember it a little bit. And so I spent a lot of time hunting down movies that actually portrayed the actual grittiness of New York at that time, and the abandoned buildings and the people living on the streets and all that stuff. And I put a ton of that into my book. And yeah, that worked for me.
That's cool. What about your other book, your less aggressively violent book?
Yeah, that book is very violent. My queer norm book is a celebration of LGBTQIA plus people, and I've just got a ton of friends who are different people across the queer spectrum. I know trans people, both trans men and women. I know several non-binary people who are very special to me. I'm gender non-conforming. I get super queer and femme sometimes, and that just is for me. So it's just a celebration of people who, as when I was growing up, didn't have a lot of representation. And so that's what I wanted to put in the book. I wanted there to be no struggle that any of my characters needed to overcome that was related directly to their identity, gender identity, or sexuality, or preference of any type of anything. I just wanted them to be, oh, this person's queer in one way or another, and that was just a fact of the story and nothing to have to triumph over, which is often the case with queer stories. Just wanted to make it, this is it, and they've got other struggles they've got to deal with.
And even just that comparison, you have very different ways of researching for those two different sort of genres as well, don't you?
Yeah,
which is quite interesting. Do you, because you have a lot of sort of Discworld themes going through your queer norm book. So did you do a lot of reading for that as well?
Oh my God, yeah. I've read the entire Discworld series up into a certain point, multiple times on some of the books. Yeah, Terry Pratchett. I'm a huge fan of Terry Pratchett. Yeah.
Yeah, he's some ideas.
The whole idea of just saying, you know what, I'm going to make my own world and do whatever I want in it. That was what sort of sparked it for me. I'm going to make a whole brand new world that is not related to this world at all, and go for it.
I think taking inspiration from other authors is a really nice way of doing it. It's almost like paying homage to their work. But then you run the risk, don't you, of having too many of the elements contained within your own work. So how did you make sure that you had that barrier between yours and theirs?
It was more about the whole concept that this is a unique world that's unlike planet Earth, unlike the solar system, unlike this universe. And I just wanted to do something like that. It's not a disc world. It's very different. And the things that I made unique about my world, I didn't take from Discworld. So I don't feel like I think it's a good representation of what influenced me, but it wasn't a huge inspiration story-wise as to what I did. But let's talk about yours, because you have a completely different method of research, because you write all sorts of different things that are very different from mine.
Yeah, a lot of mine relies heavily on military tactics. So a lot of my research has been doing, I have had to buy some military tactics books so that I can have them to hand whenever I need them. I've also had to research different war machines that were available and how they were made. And also how to track someone and work out whether they're male or female and how far they were ahead of you, and how to track when you've got no tools with you at all at nighttime, and things like that. So yeah, very interesting. It's taken me to lots of military websites as well, which talk about how to hunt and how to basically use foliage for shelter, and how to make sure you get the right plants to eat, and how to skin an animal so you can eat it. Although I'm actually not a big meat eater at all, but they have to survive in the book. So it was quite interesting.
And did you have to talk to, or do you have anybody that you got to talk to about this type of thing?
Yeah, my husband actually was in the military for his whole life. So a lot of the tactics, I would sort of do research and then I'd write a scene and then I'll take it down to him and say, right, you need to listen to this, and I'll read it to him, and then I'll say, right, does this sound like it would function? Is this like accurate detail or not? And sometimes I was okay and got it right, and sometimes he was just like, no, that just wouldn't happen. You need to change that.
Good to know. It's good. It's good to have somebody to beta read your work. Yeah, definitely.
It's it was he's been really helpful in that sense. He's got a lot of military knowledge. He was in the infantry as well, so he has a good idea of ambush sites and things. So there's a moment in book 3, for example, where she's captured and have to try and find an escape route and things like that. Book 2, there's a massive siege on a castle, and he was trying to work out a battle plan on how she was going to lay siege to this castle in one night. Normally sieges take about 4 to 6 months.
Actually, time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it was things like that. So I had to kind of condense some of it, but also had to come up with new tactics as well. And yeah. So again, lots of internet research, books, and also talking to people. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Now, I know it's interesting how different everyone is. Now, should we invite our wonderful guest authors on who are very patient?
We certainly should. Yes, let's do that.
Let's bring everyone on. I'm going to attempt this. Hang on a second.
All at once. Yeah, let's see if we can do it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. We're a little finicky on the technology, but we do our best.
Yeah, I'm still learning it, although probably people are shouting at me going, it's not that difficult, Jules. But it's when you're trying to talk and have a conversation with someone and learn something new at the same time, that's quite difficult. Okay, hang on a second. Work? No, hang on. No, that's just me.
That wasn't the right button. Woo!
No, I'm going to bring on everyone now. I normally do one at a time. I think it's probably the easiest thing.
Okay, sure.
Because I can't see where I can actually add everyone at the same time. Okay, I'm going to do this. Ready? Alex, I can see that your camera's not on. I can add you happily. So if you just let me know. No, you're fine. If you just let me know in the comments.
Yeah, I think bring Alex on too. Yeah.
Alex, there you go.
Yeah, there yeah. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. The microphones might be muted, so make sure you unmute yourself. And let's go through it. Everybody introduce yourself. Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and where we can get it, where it's available?
All right. Well, it's not available yet. Oh, can you hear me, first of all?
No,
yes, we can hear you. Great.
Okay, great. It's not available yet. I haven't even really gotten to the submission stage. I'm working more in a middle alpha pre-beta position, trying to finish up what I'm doing. It's a real mishmash of various tropes that are not usually combined. I do furry, I do sci-fi, I do fantasy, and it's all kind of mashed together in a way that's similar to Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, except forward in time rather than back in time. So there's a whole lot going on. I've developed entire cultures based on some cultures within the world that are not well known. So there's a bit of research going on there. But in large, it's mostly the main character has lived experience very much like my own. It's easy to start that way.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. And we love celebrating unpublished authors. We're so excited that you're here, and we're going to learn more about your work, and we're excited for when it gets published. Awesome.
Waiting myself.
Yay. Isaac, would you like to introduce yourself? And same thing, tell us where we can get your work and tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Excellent. All right. So my name's Isaac Scher. I have one novel published so far. It's called A Cloak of Blades. It's on Amazon. I provided you guys the URL in the chat. And the, let's see here. It's a science fantasy hybrid with also some romance tropes in there. And it's been out for about 2 years, self-published through Amazon. and I'm really happy with it. It's a space opera, mystic martial arts, the romance stuff going on, a hybrid of magic and technology that I was really happy how that turned out, where you've got starships powered by arcane flywheel reactors, and you might have a mixture of photon torpedoes and lightning wand cannons, things like that. Really happy with that. I've also got a second book that's about 95% done for the manuscript, and then it's off to the editor. And that is a more straightforward urban fantasy romance set in modern day, inspired by a trip to Japan that I took back in 2018 with my dad. We had just an amazing experience. And so shortly after that, I was inspired to start a story based on that trip, with different characters. It's not my story, of the trip. It's other people in that setting, tracing kind of the same path, different same places that I went to, so I can speak from some experience with those. And there's also a romance plot going on. There's a world conquering plot going on, all sorts of stuff. And that is the working title for that is Thy Eternal Summer, and I hope to have that out before the end of this year. Awesome. And let's see here. I'm in Chicago, and I'm going to be attending Chicago Fan Expo, hopefully, assuming everything works out. And I'll be selling my book there, or hopefully by then, books, plural, cross fingers. And yeah, what else would you like to know?
That's great. That's great. We're excited to learn more. Let's let everybody else introduce themselves too. Yeah. D. Alexander, would you like to go next and tell us all about yourself and your books and where we can get them?
Hey everyone, my name is D. Alexander. I am the author of the Memoirs of Elachai series. I self-published the first 2 memoirs. They are available on Amazon. I had a little bit different approach to my book and my writing. I actually feel more like sometimes a historian with my book, because I kind of just have seen this story replay in my head since I was like 8 or 9. It's a dark urban fantasy. It follows how the final war between free will and destiny began. It essentially follows young Danny Elachai, who just lost his parents and his brother, and he's in the city of Greenock with his aunt and uncle, and he's discovering the truth about this king of free will, the emperor of destiny, and this war for it all, kind of in a cross between The Mortal Instruments and Game of Thrones. And it's about him choosing to step out of the darkness to find hope and light. Very reminiscent of my past and my struggles. I'm actually halfway done with the 3rd book right now. I'm really excited about it. It is very dark, and one of my favorite quotes I've got from it is heartbreaking but beautiful. Like I said, with my approach with it, it's seeing the story and seeing how the elements of that story apply in our urban setting, our world, and making sure it is appropriate, handled right. Because within the Memoirs of Elachai, we're going to see a lot of diverse characters. We have a queer king. The king of free will is queer. We have people of biracial, BIPOC characters, and just ensuring that I'm handling everything appropriately and making sure that the triggers are done appropriately in a way that's healing. So it's a really dark fantasy. It's been a wonderful journey, very frustrating journey. I self-published back in 2018. Had no idea what I was doing. Had no clue. Still don't. A little bit better. But I've had a great content editor. He has helped me through everything, making sure it's cleaned and it can actually make sense. I'm actually just gave him my new book. It's called Dawn, God's United Reich. It is a gay dystopian romance set in 150 years from now with a tyrannical religious government, 2 men falling in love and overcoming that. And I'm really excited. I'm really glad to be here, guys. It's really great to meet all of you. So yeah, that's about me.
Yay, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Totally exciting. And we want to hear more about those books. That'll be great. CD, welcome. You want to tell us about yourself and your books and everything?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thanks very much for having me on your show today. My name's Chris Fox. I live in Oxford, in England. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my book, Dreams. Here it is. I don't know if you can see that. But it came out back in December. It's a psychological thriller. It's a story of 2 young undergraduates at university And one of them starts having these very strange dreams that start affecting him and his well-being. And as much as anything, it's a story about mental health. It's about young people and their seeming rise as they go through life, followed by a fall and all of the other things that happen that's associated with that. And as his character's life and his mental health begins to disintegrate, it's up to those around him to try to put some of those pieces back together. It's a book that I had floating around my head, for a long time, really, since I was back in my early 20s. And it wasn't really until the lockdowns came along in the pandemic that I started to be able to write it up. And I think probably some of that isolation that was going on in those lockdown periods, it took me to some pretty dark places in my writing, and I was able to explore things that I never thought I'd be able to explore. So it's coming out now, or it's been out, I should say, since December, and it's come out through a little publishing house called Arrowgate Publishing. They're based in London. Bought on Amazon in Kindle version or in paperback or in hardback if you want to. But you can also buy it at other retailers like Waterstones or Blackwell's in the UK or Barnes & Noble in the USA. So I'm really excited to have that out now. And I'm around about 81,000 words into the next one, which is completely different, whereas Dreams is written in the third person and deals with a couple of young protagonists at university. My second book, White Nile, is much more first person in terms of the narrative. It's set mostly on the African continent. It features an Iraq war soldier who's done some pretty horrific things that have scarred him mentally. And he goes away traveling, trying to put his life back on track. And while he's there, he makes a discovery that leads him right at the center of a big geopolitical mess. So you can see some common themes there, although they're slightly different books in terms of the way they're written. There's a lot of stuff there about mental health. And really the genre is very much thriller. So dead happy to have that out. Dead happy to be with everybody today sharing that. And apologies for my hay fever. I don't know what it's like in America, but it's terrible over here in England.
Oh,
so
no.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, there's allergies. Everything started blooming much later this season. So yeah, I think everybody's dealing with stuff. Brutal. But you sound fine. Everything seems great. So yeah, welcome. Glad you're here. And Alex, are you there? Are you good?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Yes.
Hi, sorry, my camera's up. I'm super nervous. I have such dysphoria about being on camera.
No. You are so welcome. You are totally cool. We are so casual here. Just hang out with us. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So my name is Alex. I write paranormal romances, and they're very heavy on mental health and mental illness, because obviously as someone who struggles as such, it's very important to me to have it in my writing, especially for people who want to read something like that, who don't usually have that type of representation in a lot of writing. So we follow the main character, Eden, who is to become, or is the goddess of beasts. So it's like a hybrid of beasts and people. And she's obviously thrown into this world where she's struggling with her mental health and now has to be put into a situation where she is someone of supernatural importance to a whole society of new people. And obviously being thrown into that situation is going to be a little crazy, but that's what I write. And the best part about it is that not a lot of research involved, because it's it's a lot of fantasy and paranormal. So I get to pretty much do what I like to do.
Well, and I think we're going to get delve. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jules. Go.
No, you're okay. I was just going to say, can I say, I don't know if your hair color is that color now, or if that's even a picture of you and you just use some. But if that is your hair color and that is a picture of you, you're a much braver person than I am, because I've always wanted to dye my hair that sort of color, but never felt the courage to do it.
Yes, that is my actual hair. It's not that color anymore. It's kind of faded, but it was once that color, but it still looks good now, kind of faded rainbow.
Well, you're a lot braver than I am.
Thank you.
And I was just going to say that I don't think there's any negative side to using your own personal experience as part of your inspiration and research for what you use to write. I think that's awesome. And Brian mentioned tropes at the beginning. We celebrate tropes on here. We love to flip them on their heads and do all sorts of stuff. So yeah, we love where everybody gets their ideas. So thanks for being here, Alex, and everybody. And yeah, like Jules. Go ahead, Jules. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing. I was just saying yes, and welcome to you all. there is a slight delay sometimes. So if you end up accidentally talking over someone, don't worry. It's just because we are literally across the globe. So for those of you who are not watching us over on YouTube, why not? Come over here. You should be on here watching us here. We are on YouTube. We're also live on Twitter. For some reason, it's not gone live on LinkedIn. I have no idea why, but hey. If you are watching on Twitter, you can come over here, join in the live chat. If you have nice comments or questions or thoughts that you would like to share, or you have something specific you want to ask our authors, post it in the chats on YouTube, and we'll do our best to get through them so that you can have your questions answered. As you've probably heard, there's lots of very different ways of doing research. So this is like an open kind of discussion at the moment. I know I've let you all know that you are welcome to do some reading as well. There is no bars on what you can or can't read. So, swear words are absolutely fine. As well as graphic stuff as well. We try and have like a nice open discussion at the very beginning, because it just means that everyone gets a chance to have their say and everyone has different things that they want to add or include. And I think it's also useful for people watching or listening to be able to, take pointers from everybody. Everyone's got different styles. So shall I start it off? Would that make it easier for people?
Sure.
So one of the things that I do, and Adam and I are doing a collaboration at work at the moment, which we're both in the process of working on, and we've got very different styles of dealing with it. And I don't know exactly how Adam's doing his part, but my part has involved this huge amount of research in terms of watching stalker videos.
You heard that right. Stalker videos. Stalker.
Yes. And so, it's taken me down some very dark pathways in documentaries, and also looking on forums and, reading about how victims feel when they have that happen to them. And so that's been a very interesting journey for me, because it's not something I've ever actually had to look at before. And so, lots of documentaries more than anything like that. I haven't had anyone in my family or anyone that I know be stalked, so it's been quite an interesting delve into a mind that I've never existed in before. So, but I mean, I'm interested to hear what you all have to say, because you all have your own methods, and they all sound really interesting. Open discussion. Join in. You don't have to wait for us to say your name. It's just an open chat, and then we can go straight into doing some reading.
I will say I have a family member who has dealt with a stalker. And
really?
Yeah, and the thing that surprised me the most about it was the depth of the psychological harm that could be incurred, even if like it's a quote unquote relatively light stalking, where like the person's not following them to their car every day. It wasn't like that. It was more of an online stalking and some other stuff going on. But all the same, you could see the damage being done to the person being stalked, and it was eye-opening. It's not that I didn't know stalking was bad before, but it's like, oh, wow, it's real bad.
This was Jules' idea, and that was basically what she wanted to sort of explore, is like the trauma that somebody goes through, and how it changes a person. Yeah, no, that's exactly what we were talking about.
Intense stuff.
Very intense. It's interesting, because I've been dropping snippets, haven't I?
You keep teasing about this book.
And this is probably the most I've ever said about it.
That was revealing.
But thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry that your family members had to go through that. That's horrendous.
It seems to be resolved now, thankfully. And she's doing a lot better.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
But there was a time where like our family would do a weekly Zoom call just to kind of check in with her, and the effect was visible. It was not just like you were hearing in her voice or in her text and in email. You could see it on her face and her body language. She was losing weight. You could see it in the her cheeks. It was dramatic. It was intense.
I'm genuinely really sorry that that's happened to them, but I'm glad that they had family to support them. Okay. All right. So what about your books?
Yeah.
Because obviously that's the one that I'm doing with Adam, and it's a specific one to do with that. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Isaac. But in terms of your writing, what do you do? How do you research?
Well,
Open question.
I'll say that much like I think Alex said, a lot of my stuff is entirely fictional. So that makes the research relatively easy. Well, so how many light years per minute does the ghost bubble drive allow starships to travel? I get to make that up. Although that being said, actually, when I was thinking about that, I did do some Googling with regards to, okay, what are the distances? Like, how many light years wide is the galaxy? So if I want ships to be able to literally travel the width and breadth of the galaxy, how many light years per minute or day or whatever is reasonable in order for that to do? So I did have to do some Googling with regards to that. But then on the other hand, the urban fantasy I'm working on, part of that, like I mentioned, was drawn from my own experience in Japan. But even then, sometimes I went back and like, okay, wait, so when was Shitanoji Temple actually built? I don't remember that particular detail. So, going in and looking up stuff like that. So for me, research is really just a matter of Google searches in the moment as I think of it. That's probably the best way to describe my method. But again, that's just me.
I think that's very similar to how I do it with mine. Though I'm trying to incorporate themes from modern Earth into a theoretical planetary colonization 1,000 light years and 1,000 real years away. It's a lot of it is just off the cuff. I have had to look up a few things, especially in coming up with inventing entire cultural sets. Because I'm running a furry adjacent world where you have both humans and a variety of other non-human or humanoid animal types. The question became then, why do they exist? And then how did they individually build a culture, a society, when they started breaking up into species-specific groupings after the collapse of a global government. For instance, I spent a good deal of time digging into the Muso culture in northern Tibet or China. This is a matrilineal society where it's a poly society, and so there's not really a marriage, a male-female marriage system per se. It's literally, they call it a walking marriage, and the women run everything, and they decide who they want to sleep with. So
reminds me a little bit of the line marriages from Heinlein's "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress."
Yeah, kind of, but even more structured within the matrilineal society. So I have one of my species groups as being cat-based. And to me, that seems to be very much like how a clouder works in real life with cats. So you extend that to what a human society is as similar as possible. And it's been a lot of fun to research that and come up with how that works and how the people involved are interacting, especially the main character who's coming from 21st century Earth, or because magic.
Yeah.
Yay, magic. And so there's a whole lot going on there in that research profile. I'm still working on other comparative groups for the Urson bear breed, the foxes, the varieties of people that are being incorporated. And otherwise, most of it just comes out of me because the main character is a very broken person for a variety of reasons, has PTSD, is autistic, has a lot of things that are just going on in how he copes with life. And suddenly his life no longer relates to anything. And now how do you start over? So that's where the first book in what's building out to be a 3 or 4 book series, depending on which which storyline you're working on, or backstories. So that's kind of where I am with it. And it's been very interesting to go that direction.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. The information you told us about the tribe that you used as inspiration, that must have been fascinating. I mean, that, like I said, yeah, that sounds really
there was actually a big deal done by it, done by National Geographic, I think it was, on matrilineal societies, and I can throw a link in there, but they really weren't seen much until about, was it the 1970s? It was that isolated, and the entire culture was, kind of like you think the Sudanese are the island, the no contact island people, except these are no contact high mountain China, Tibet people.
Are you talking about the Sentinelese?
Pardon?
The Sentinelese?
Sentinelese, yeah.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember that.
Fascinating people.
Yeah, fascinating idea, and they may be useful in some other context. But the Muswo people have actually, embraced to a certain extent contact with Western world. It's not doing their culture very well, but it means we actually do understand their past culture versus why we will never understand the Sentinelese.
Oh, wow, so. That is fascinating.
Just to step in slightly, we've got a question directed specifically at you, Chris. The questions are, hang on a second.
We can sometimes pop them up on the screen. Let's see if we can get it right. Let's see. Hey, look at that.
Does it come up? Oh, yeah, there we go. So it says, a big fan of CD Fox and his book Dreams. Please, can you ask him the following question? Did you always know it would end for Hugo? And then did you know it from the start of the writing process?
Yeah, okay, good question. I'm just going to flip that around a little bit for a second, because the book that I'm writing at the moment is, I've said a little bit about it. It's a book called White Nile, involving military personnel. And I basically had the first few chapters, or the first chapter, I would say, sorted out in my head. And I had it very clear in my mind. And then I had the next few chapters after that sort of assembled in my mind, but not really knowing quite how it was going to end. And it wasn't until I got around about 75,000 words into that book that I thought, I know, this is how I'm going to end that book. It was very much flying by the seat of my pants, or writing as a pantser, which is a term that some of you might have heard, which was what was going on in that book. With the first book, Dreams, almost the opposite was true. And I was writing towards a particular endpoint. And that was pretty much how the book was constructed, really. I had this fixed point that I wanted to get to, which was the ending of the book, in mind. And it was very much a case of, how do I get there? How do I make this work? How do I stitch it all together, getting towards that end point? So two completely different ways of working with that. How did I end up with, doing it the other way around in that sense? Well, I don't want to say too much in case I give everything away, but it was essentially inspired by Greek tragedy, really. I remember seeing a TV program when I was in my early 20s, where it was actually something by Shakespeare. It was put into a modern context. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. Maybe I'll try that with my writing, get hold of something historic and try to write a modern 21st century version of it that nobody would really be able to link back to that original piece unless I told them what it was. And I happened to go to the theatre and I watched, it was a Greek play, which I think, for obvious reasons, should probably remain nameless in case it gives the ending of the book away. And that was the nugget that I took, and that was the ending that I decided that I was going to work towards. And everything else was just a modern twist, modern 21st century settings in a university. And then we ended up where we got to by the end of the book, in all sorts of manner of ways, by hook or by crook, with research. And the way that I do the research is, I suppose you could say, twofold, really. There's, first of all, my books, I try to be quite, I try to build a vivid picture in what I'm writing. And in my first book, Dreams, it's very much the English countryside, which I try to depict. I try to bring people into the countryside so they can almost see, smell, hear what's going on. And so there's a lot of my own experiences in that. So I didn't have to do very much research. In White Nile, the book that I'm writing at the moment, is largely set in Sudan and particularly in Khartoum. I've never been there. So there was a lot of Google images that I was looking at there. A lot of Google Maps that I'm looking at, trying to work out where various sites are in relation to other sites. So all of that was going on, as was the research into psychology and psychological conditions for dreams, or military practices and military history, which was needed for White Nile as well. And as I said, being something of a pantser, just flying by the seat of my pants, rather than doing a whole chunk of research to begin with, I'll often sit down with a vague idea of a scene in my head, start writing, get a paragraph in and think, right, I need to work out, what does this thing I'm talking about actually look like? Or what is the historical connection between this and this particular aspect that I'm writing? So quite often my phone comes out and 2 or 3 hours here, and I've got like one paragraph on the page, and then I think, I better put the phone away and start doing some catch up now. So it's a bit higgledy-piggledy how it works like that. I don't know if anybody else does that. I'm sure I'm doing it the wrong way, but hey ho, I got a book out of it.
I don't think you are. I think a lot of us do that. I'm very interested in psychology, as people know who've been listening to the show for a while. So psychology is quite present in my books, particularly trauma and mental health issues that come from that. As well as on forensic psychology, and the mind of a psychopath also fascinates me. Hence the book with Adam.
I'd like to say that you mentioned the 2 different books, how you wrote them by different methods, and that's totally awesome. We've had several authors who came on and have said something similar, that every book was inspired a different way and was written a different way and whatever. I'm a strict plotter. Like I just went to try and write a short story just by an experiment with no plot whatsoever, and it was very strange for me, but I write everything very, very strict. So it's cool to have people do things different ways and just learn from each other. Yeah,
hugely.
I'm definitely a pantser too. I cannot outline.
Same here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. No, I have to know everything before I get started. I have to know everything. Alex or D. Alexander, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you research your works? Uh-oh. We there?
I'm here.
Like he's frozen up. Oh, Alex is here. Okay, good.
Yep, I'm here. So I'm usually a plotter, so I have to have everything down and out, and every chapter, every word, plot summaries in each chapter. But the way I research, I'm down to, this character's blue because I said they're blue, and then there'll be some days where I'm like, I need to look up the exact way to roll your foot on the ground, and I'll be Googling everything and trying to get all the details of something so minuscule that probably no one else would realize in a book, but it's very important for the plot. But other than that, it's the way I research. It's all fantasy. So I feel like that gives me the upper hand of making things up with some things that you can that are relevant to real life, as in like some places where you begin. But that's pretty much how I research. It's mostly all fantasy.
Rolling the ankle. Oh, ouch. Oh.
Yeah.
Even you just saying that. Oh, yeah. Brutal.
I know. And all the pain that goes into it. Because as someone who how many times have you rolled your ankle and you're thinking about what the pain is, Sometimes I'm like, what does that feel like? But yeah, it's a lot of weird things that we're Googling that I'm wondering if the FBI is watching me sometimes.
Yeah, that is something there that I wanted to kind of touch on is, when someone is a writer when they never want you to see what their browser history is. Because like I've had to Google things like, how long does it take to die from a stomach stab wound? It's just like,
or decomposing or all sorts of things. Yeah, all sorts of things like that. Yeah.
I've been fairly lucky there. My main character almost dies a half dozen times. He's certainly not a Mary Sue. He almost dies. But as someone with a medical background, that's a lot easier for me than other issues. And as a pantser, I write scenes and then I kind of mash scenes together. And And dialogue. I'll get an entire chunk of dialogue that drops into my head. It's like, okay, where does this fit in the book?
Yep.
But so that's what I do. And as a pantser, as a person who really writes for audio more than for text, visual text, mainly because I don't normally have time to read. I listen constantly. So I have huge audiobooks collections, and I listen. So I write for the ear. And it's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to write for the ear unless they can hear it. So I've come up with a couple of ways of getting decent text to speech software that reads with at least enough of a dialect that you can kind of understand a better feeling of what the text is trying to present than just reading it word by word by word, as for instance the Microsoft Word electronic voice does. So I've found that to be terribly useful, at least since I write mostly on my phone, and I have certain Android apps that work really well for that. So
I read aloud almost everything I write, because for that exact same reason, something that will look good on the page often sounds just wrong when spoken aloud, or vice versa. It sounds great when you speak it aloud, but then you put it on the page and it looks wrong, you know. So yeah, very important. And those are two different skills, you know, writing for the ear and writing for the eyes, and trying to do both is not always easy. So yeah.
I met an author once who he labels himself as a method author. So a bit like a method actor would, lock themselves away and get themselves in the zone. Yeah, that's what he did, and he wrote a
former theater degree. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about method. Not all of them complimentary, but I hear what you're saying.
I've never tried this method. It certainly wouldn't work in my books, because mine are science, fantasy, dystopian, fantasy kind of books. So they just it doesn't work. But he got trained as a bodyguard, and then wrote a whole series just on being a bodyguard. And he did very well for himself, but it's a completely different way of writing than obviously just sitting down and doing research or talking to people. It's actually getting in the zone. Oh yeah, interesting. All right, would you like to do some readings for us? We would love to hear you. Go on,
I would
Isaac.
very much like to. I would like to go first if possible, if only because depending on how long this goes, I may have to leave a little early. I hope not, but it depends on how long this ends up running.
It's fine. You're very welcome to go.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what happened to our guest, D. Alexander, but I hope they're able to come back and join us again. And we'd love to having them. And if they're not able to join us today, I'll try and get them back on a different day instead. But yeah. And Isaac, why don't you go first? And we'll pop you on the screen just like we did Chris a few minutes ago by yourself. I believe we've got your cover image for your book. We'll pop that up part of the time as well, and just read for a while. Sorry. Introduce yourself again. Tell us the name of the book again, where we can get it one more time, because we want people to get your books and we want people to celebrate reading, and then read for a while. And when you're done, just let us know, and we will all pop back on the screen again.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Cool.
So again, my name's Isaac Scher, and I am the author of A Cloak of Blades, which is available on Amazon, both in Kindle format and in paperback format. And in fact, if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can download the Kindle version for free. So just throwing that out there. And what I'm going to be reading is the very first chapter to kind of give people a feel for the way I write and the story that I'm building there. So that way you don't have to have any foreknowledge going in. So let's see here. Pardon me. Chapter 1, Madame Blotka and the Shard. You understand that if you speak a word about this to anyone, I'll flay the corneas from your pretty brown eyeballs, grind your spinal cord into my next cauldron brew, and for good measure take my trusty sliver pistol and blast the points right off those ears of yours. The ancient orc frowned as she swiped through a few files on her tablet, looking back up to her guest at a simple wooden pipe sliding back and forth between her small tusks. Are we clear on this? The tall goblin nodded, brushing an errant microbraid of her long black hair away from her crimson-skinned face. Clear as a crystal tablet, honored shaman. Save your honorifics for someone who gives a turd, rock runner. I have a good thing going here on Xenophon, but if word got out that I was hoarding and casting forbidden resonance rituals, especially ones using the sympathy principle, I would have Madam Magistrate's guard gunning me down like a rabid griffin. And here I thought Xenophon Outpost took a twisted pride in not having any laws. The shaman made a dry and humorless laugh, looking up at her customer. Indeed. But when someone used a similar spell to take mental command of Lady Cavendish Xenophon's pretty little trophy wife and steal her away, not my work, upon my oath, well, our lone local politician has ways of making her opinions known and enforced. She glanced down at her tablet, made one more swipe, and then nodded to herself. You said the item you wished to enchant was metal, not something or someone organic, yes? The goblin nodded, holding up a mass of worked metal about the size of a dinner plate, the edges jagged and irregular. Yes, I need to trace this shard back to whatever it was once a part of. Holding out her hand to receive the shard, the shaman's gnarled fingers rubbed off some of its long collected dust. This can be done. This will be a cash job. No computer record of this whatsoever, and I do insist on a robust hard currency. 75,000 credits in Andahar gold notes, Miss Hericket, up front. Madam Blotka. A puff of fragrant smoke drifted up from the pipe, briefly obscuring her wide and eager eyes. With the amount of money you're about to give me, you may call me Olga. Olga, then. And you may call me Coriolis. But let's be reasonable. That dragon opal I gave you is already worth 25,000 credits. That was just to get you through my office door, and to admit that I had such rituals at all. And I might not have even done that if your great aunt Tempest hadn't been such a dear friend back in my adventuring days. Do give her my regards. She reached over to her desk and held up the sparkling gem the size of a hen's egg, its flame-like color shifting as she turned it to and fro under the light. This is a lovely piece, yes. Taking everything into account, 60,000 more for the cost of the ritual itself. She replaced the gem, then took another close look at the shard in her other hand. I've never seen metal quite like it. This dark gray-black color with veins of gold is most unusual. The light seems to just fall into it. She hefted it in her palm up and down for a moment, then pulled gently on one section. Very lightweight, a hint of flexibility, but clearly far stronger than any steel or ceramic plate. The force needed to blast off a piece like this would have been quite intense. Where in the cosmos did you find this? That knowledge is not free, Olga. I could tell you, but I'd insist we drop your price from 50,000 down to 35 in return. Wise of you. She paused in thought. Never mind the origin tale, then. The opal plus 50,000 cash for my consultation fee and the ritual together. I won't concede a centicred less. Do you need to ask your captain to approve this? Coriolis gestured to the door behind her. Captain Liang has the money, but he's given me full authority to negotiate on his behalf. Shall we get your fee? By all means, do. The shaman pressed a button on her desk, causing her office door to lose its protective shimmer. The heavy door made a series of deep clunking noises as an assortment of locks disengaged. Corey stood up and walked out past the fountain of rust-red scales standing just outside the door, nodding her head in greeting. Chunk? The draconian security guard nodded back, his massive clawed hands resting comfortably on a pair of equally huge pistols at his hip, a sliver gun and a force bolter. Both weapons bore a faint glow of combat enchantments, no doubt added by Madame Blotka herself. Corey. She walked around the counter towards a black-shelled Tientang mantis man standing at one wall of the shaman's store. The mantis hominid's lower two arms each held a briefcase, while the upper two held a book, flipping through the pages before sliding it back onto the shelf at Corey's approach. Will she deal with us? Yes, Captain. 50,000 more after the opal. As you anticipated, she wants it in Andaharan cash. His large compound eye clusters shifting to a resigned pink glow, he gestured with the two briefcases, dropping his mellifluous basso voice to a whisper. Well done. Your family's connection to her clearly worked in our favor. I was concerned we might have to pay many more times that. And reduce our profits? I'd rather die. Her captain shook his mantis-like head. Money isn't everything, first mate. I respectfully differ, sir. Being poor can be fatal under many circumstances. Placing the briefcases onto the large counter at the back of the store, Captain Liang nodded in sad concession to her point. He started counting out stacks of bills, each one a rectangle of rainbow-colored paper bearing the number 100, and a handsome face from ancient history in the center, a man with a combination of both orcish and human features, with a head of long, thick, wavy hair. Corey picked up one of the stacks and made a show of kissing the face on one of those bills. Ah, Lord Mayhem, it pains me to part with so many of you, but we'll have even more of you ere long. Liang pointed to the bill stack she held. I want you to keep that one, Corey. Put it towards your brother's caretaker fund. Coriolis froze. Captain, I can't do that. Everyone on the crew is getting equal shares in this venture. It wouldn't be right. Nonsense. Your words reminded me that you're setting aside considerable funds towards his treatment. He needs every cent of credit that can be spared, the poor fellow. When Corey tried to return the bills to him, he pushed her hand away. If it helps you feel any better, think of it as your commission on this negotiation. Corey swallowed and nodded, slowly pocketing the bills. By this point, Olga had emerged from her office. She picked up one of the stacks at random, running her tablet over it. It gave an affirmative beep, and through her transparent device, she saw the portrait of Lord Mayhem, now outlined by a slender line of glowing light. And there's the gold micro thread woven into the paper bill. She reached across and grabbed two more random stacks, getting the same result and nodding in satisfaction. I appreciate you not being so foolish as to try and counterfeit me, Guan. I wouldn't dream of it, Olga. It's always a pleasure doing business with professionals. After finishing his count of 50,000, he lifted up 9 more bound stacks of 1,000 credits each, placing 8 of them next to the first pile, then tossed the last one to Chunk. The bodyguard caught it, flicked a thumb across the edge to do a quick count, and with a friendly nod put it in his jacket pocket. A tip for your polite associate, and 2,000 more for you to affirm that we were never here and that you've never seen this shard. Olga laughed. What shard? She spun the slice of odd metal on her fingertip like a playground ball. I was just about to go back to my kitchen and cook up a pan of peanut brittle. If you'll wait out here, I'll let you have the first piece, but I won't be sharing the recipe. Should take an hour at most. Corey lifted her wrist and tapped a button on the band there. A moment later, a male voice was in her ear. Hey, first mate, good news? Noresh put out the call to all crew. 30-minute warning. I want Snowdrop, Lindariel, and George to meet us at Madame Blotka's Emporium, and I want Enrique back on the ship with you, prepping the Endurance for immediate departure. Orders heard, Corey. Expecting trouble? Call it a hunch. I thought I spotted Havoc and Lane Korga in a crowd earlier, and if they're here, that means Thurman's here. I'm not taking any chances. Serious assholes, those. I'll get on the audio to everyone. Endurance out. Madame Blotka held up the last 6 stacks Captain Liang had removed from his case. And what would these extras be for? Not that I mind taking your money. 6 kilo credits worth of your best healing materials. Combat potions or patches, toxin clears, antibiotics, both mild and heavy-duty painkillers, and slow-heal drip bags for our ship's medbay. Lifting up a large and heavy-looking green duffel bag from behind the counter, Olga Blatka set it down in front of her customers on the countertop and unzipped it to display its contents. For that much, you get my Emerald Deluxe assortment, dear Captain. All that you've asked for in plenty, and a few of my newest and best emergency stabilizers. Slap one of these red patches on a dying bastard's chest, and then another on their neck, and you'll stay the hand of the Queen of Silence herself, much respect to her eternal divine majesty, long enough for proper healing. She patted the bag with satisfaction. But didn't I hear on the wind that you'd recently added a healer to your little crew? A voice of our aforementioned death goddess, no less? Captain Liang leaned over to look into the bag, his eyes glowing blue with satisfaction. We did indeed. Lindariel Moonblossom joined us just 6 months ago, but I believe in being prepared. Thank you.
Yay, that was marvelous. Here, let me unmute everybody. We're muted. Hold on. Yay.
Thank you.
That was so great. The voices you were giving us were ridiculous. We loved it.
Well, I do have voice actor training, and I am planning to make an audiobook version of these. So
marvelous. Marvelous. Jules, you're still muted, hon. Jules.
Sorry. I had a whole load of downloads come up on the screen, and it made the mute and cam buttons disappear. Sorry, apologies. That was really good. I really enjoyed the voices as well. I like the character Coriolis as well. Where did you get that name from?
Well, actually, so from an old role-playing game, there is a superhero role-playing game called Champions. Came out in the 80s, where it was basically D&D but superheroes. Mm-hmm. And one of the adventures that they published was called The Coriolis Effect, which was basically about elemental superheroes and supervillains. Like in Coriolis in particular was a new superheroine with wind powers. And so that was all. I always thought that word sounded cool, and I looked it up. It's sort of an effect of how, like, if something is spinning and then released, it sort of curves as it winds out. But the goblin people, of which Coriolis is one, which are that cover image, actually, if you can pull that one up again for just a second, she's the one with the red skin and the black hair and silver armor on the front cover. Those are goblins in my setting. And goblins tend to have names with elemental motifs. And the fashion of people around Corey's age were wind-themed names. So she's Coriolis. There's some other characters who show up around the same age who are named Sylph or Zephyr, so things like that.
Mm-hmm. And who's the other character? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. The other character there, that is Lindario Moonblossom, the other protagonist. And he is a priest of the Queen of Silence, who is a benevolent goddess of death in this setting. Where her mandate is basically that death is a natural part of the life cycle, but that it should be handled with mercy. Comforting the dead, at funerals, things of that nature, making sure people pass peacefully rather than in pain. That's a big part of what she's about, as well as the larger concept of just the cycle of life and death in general. And he gets introduced in the next chapter, where he has a theological battle with a priest of a different faith who's basically abusing his congregation very thoroughly, which is a bit of social commentary on my part with regards to certain modern religious sects that I won't go into here.
And you want to tell us about the artist behind the book?
Yes. I am very happy with how the art turned out. That art was done by a friend of mine who is also a professional comic book artist who's done some work for Marvel and DC and some of his own stuff, named Jamie Noguchi, Noguchi. Did wonderful work. I'm absolutely going to be working with him again on my next book and any book after that. He also helped me to design the Endurance, the starship that the crew are all a part of, which is on the cover there. On the front cover, it's a little obscured by the logo, but the back cover image, which I did send you as well, you can see the ship a little more clearly.
I have that on my phone. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No worries. But he helped me design the ship as well. So we talked.
So it's just an excuse for you to have to come back on again, so we can see.
So we can look at the back cover. Yeah.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you so much for reading.
Go on, sorry. I was just going to say, and I do have sequels planned for Cloak of Blades. There's one in the works right now titled The Grand Melee, which is going to be my attempt to... I've always been a big fan of stories that are referred to as tournament arcs, where there's like a big martial arts tournament of some sort. And The Grand Melee is my attempt to do a story of that mode using my characters in this setting, which I refer to as arcane space.
Cool. And I know you said you might need to drop out early. If you need to go at some point, don't worry about just dip out. That's no problem at all.
I can stick around for a little while longer because I'd like to hear what some of the other folks have to say and read. But for the moment, I'm good. Yes.
Okay, great.
Well, I have.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
No, I mean, there was a we have. Let's go with the we have first.
We have a question on the comments. I've got to put up on the screen. I think this is open to everyone. So Ellie writes, when writing for the ear, how often does the formatting come into play?
Wow, this is perfect because that's just where I was going to go. The formatting, it depends on your reader. I tend to write for a very neutral type of reader because I'm initially writing for a text-to-speech software program. If you have a really good reader, that's a professional reader, you go through some of the formatting and change the formatting with them personally. I have to change the spelling on several of the words in my writing just to get it to read correctly. The spelling will be completely wrong because it reads phonetically otherwise, and it's some jumble. So yeah, when you're running your software or running your text through software, it's good to have a whole list of global spelling changes. So you can just say, all right, we're running it under the how this program reads it. So we'll change every spelling of the name of this character so the program can read it, or it sounds wrong. So it's kind of a yes and a no, because you talk to a professional and show them, okay, this is how we spell this name, and it's pronounced this way. You don't have to change the formatting.
Right.
Software isn't there yet. I don't even think AI could get there. Not that I want to participate in AI in any way. Anyway, so I've got a little bit here. I was going to throw this out and see whether it worked. It's a short reading. It's not exactly safe for work, but
awesome.
I have two readings that I could use. I have one for my that's a couple of queer characters from the next book, or actually a prequel, but it's kind of jumbled because I had to cut out some superfluous text. This one that I've got is very constrained around the action, and we'll see how it goes, I guess, because I think this is a little bit more representative of what's happening to the characters in the way they deal with things. So let me make sure I don't end up with feedback here real quick. So
Brian, 1 second. Isaac's got a question, I think.
Yeah. Before you start, Brian, I apologize. I want to just address one other aspect of the previous question about formatting.
Yeah, sure.
One thing that I know I like to do is when I'm writing dialogue, there are some times where I have deliberately avoid, John said, Mary said, things like that, because to me it breaks up the flow.
Absolutely.
And formatting becomes key there, because you want to make sure that you're separating the speech with line breaks, paragraph breaks, whatnot, to make it clear that, okay, someone else is now speaking. But also, if you've established that this is a two-person dialogue, usually you don't necessarily need to do John said, Mary said quite as often. You still have to throw it in somewhere just to make sure, but you can ease off on that a little bit with good formatting to help maintain the flow for the ear rather than on the page. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, the flow. Yeah, if you're reading it out loud to yourself, I think that almost always gives away exactly when you have a John said that you don't need. You're reading along and you say that, and suddenly you realize you're got this clunky moment of John said. I don't need this one. You get rid of it, and then you get because it'll flow when you've got a moment when you're like, John said, and it goes completely with what they just spoke.
Right, because I've listened to professional audiobooks done by books by authors I really love, by narrators I know and respect, but they're reading the text exactly, and there's lots of he said, she said, John said, Mary said, and and for audiobooks that doesn't always work. It breaks it up, especially if the narrator is doing a good job of audio differentiating the characters with different voices or cadences.
Right.
So it's again, writing for the ear and writing for the eye are not always the same skill. So just throwing that out there.
I agree absolutely. I try to avoid bookisms whenever possible. Let me throw this out and see if this works.
Okay, Brian, can we pop you up on the full screen like we did for?
Oh, sure. No, that's fine.
So real quick again, we'll do that. We'll pop you and introduce yourself one more time. Tell us where. Oh, your book's coming out when you. Yeah, right. So tell us.
Yeah, whenever it comes out. Yeah, my name is Brian. I'm mostly available on Twitter, Grumpy Muzzle, and I'm doing a kind of a very mixed metaphor sort of book, just as an exercise as much as anything. I'm going to show you, if at all possible, how a chunk of text from the first book is read by one of my text-to-voice readers that I use as part of my editing process, so I can hear things that just don't sound right, even though you skim over them in the book and they may look okay, they just don't sound right. So I'm going to throw this out there and see what you all think. Hopefully it won't cause a problem. I'm going to mute my local speakers to avoid feedback, and we'll go from there. So let's give it a shot.
Ellipsists. Day 27. KMRF lapsed into silence, watching Jack closely. Then she brought her face close and rubbed her cheek against his. Jack, she asked softly, sounding almost embarrassed and a little hurt. Yes. Why haven't you taken me to mate? Bolting upright and nearly colliding with her face as he started to crab away, he locked his eyes on hers. What? Why have you not mated with me? All last evening I raised my tail to you. Were there Felidae males near, they would be coming for my scent alone. She did look hurt. Jack remembered her bending over for her hatchet, collecting sticks for the fire, her tail close and yes, even her musky scent. He looked away from her, embarrassment clawing at his face and chest. That was you last night, wasn't it? Calling for a mate, because I didn't act. Jack, it is my time. I have been near you for more than 7 hands of days. 1 whole twin moon, and before, after you saved me, I had no one, and was not well. Jack, don't you remember me telling about Felidae when we began our travel together? For me, for all Felidae females, mating time comes. But your magic, he was babbling, and knew it. Doesn't stop the need, just dull it. Only mating makes the need pass. Jack, you a male. I need a male, and you too smell of mating. Her imploring eyes bored into him, glancing down at the growing peak in his towel. He blushed, but, I am not Felidae, he whispered. I have never, how can I? It's been so long. Taking his head in her hands, and booping his forehead with hers, she rubbed her cheeks against his. Jack, you don't have to know. What I ask is taboo with humans, but you are different. You are not human. You care more than most Felidae males. Your soft touch, the things you do with your fingers in my head fur, no Felidae male does this. For these things I choose you, as your females choose their males. It is new to me too, this choosing, but I will help you, as I have many young males of my tribe. You have given me hope that I can finish my quest. I will not allow myself to suffer the sickness if there is that chance. Will you do this, for me? Jack nodded slowly. Kamurf took his towel, noting how different he was from the males of her tribe, of her past. He had no sheath of skin to protect him, and he stood proud in front of that ridiculous patch of coarse fur. But it was what she needed, and she was prepared for it. Kneeling, she turned her body away, and, wrapping her tail around him, drew him into her. Jack didn't know what to think. He had been traveling with, living with, fighting alongside this woman. Cat. Both. For about a month, and now he had been taken up bodily by a need he had ignorantly ignored, and he was oddly ashamed at his fear and arousal. She wrapped her tail around his waist, urging him to her. He stared at her form, the heart shape of her rump little different than that of human women, save for the tail and silken fur that both hid and accentuated her nakedness. He gently touched her hormone-engorged lips, feeling the peak of her arousal, her wetness removing all worry. Gently, almost with trepidation, he entered her, but her body took him without hesitation. Her body, her mind, held no ambivalence or revulsion to his touch. Her need, her desire, was for him only, and the intensity of that desire held him captive. He leaned in, seeking purchase in the soft, slick fur of her hips as her body pulled at him, hungry for release, demanding they never separate. There was ecstasy in just holding her, every follicle of fur finding a nerve, the hump of her encircling tail caressing his belly. He found the rhythm of her purrs, merging himself with it. Her grip was insane. The rhythm grew in bodily desperation, dragging him deeper even as her body wouldn't let him reach his peak. Kamurf's mind reeled. Jack needed no instruction. Perhaps females were more alike than fur would suggest, and males less so. The young males from before took no time before the pain came and they left. But Jack never stopped. Unlike the young males she had taken to both teach and settle her need, he filled her completely, always moving, in time with the throbbing of her belly and her purrs. She was floating, no longer in control of her body, the call of mating overwhelming everything, but still she waited for the pain. Higher and higher her body took her, feeding off of the male within her, his unending motion, the strength of his grasp, the fullness of his being. Jack had never experienced anything like this. Now he knew he wasn't dreaming, this wasn't a human quickie, nor a delirious fantasy. Her fur, her grip, her body's desperate need, she was not human. He was her, not human. They, together, were not human, and suddenly he knew, with the sureness of life itself, what he needed to do. He slid his hands away from her hips, grasping her small firm breasts as he fell on her back, and, with primal instinct, took the scruff of her neck in his mouth and bit down, pulling her tightly to him. Kamurf's body exploded as she let loose a feral yowl and went limp from the paralyzing bite. Then she clamped down like a vice on the male within her and pulled for his essence like the vacuum of space. In that fraction of an instant when her body relaxed, the bonds that held Jack's very soul were shattered and released the torrent that years of rejection and aching loneliness held locked within him, filling her even as her body demanded more. He gripped her like a bear, teeth gently digging into her scruff and vision going white as he convulsed in time with her body, until, at last, his strength faded and they collapsed together on the golden moss.
Wow.
Hang on. All right, there we go. So that's just a little bit there. I throw the erotica into my series to show that that it's natural. It's not not contrived. If there's always a reason for it, and has a definite plot structure to it. In this case, the feline people, feline females, they still require, well, they think they do. You find out later that it's not quite that way. Oh, come on. Ovulation by pain, the way felines do on Earth. And they can't get rid of that by the genetic manipulation that created the animals, or created the furries. And so this is why keep hearing her thinking about the pain. And in the end, you find out that because he's not a feline, he cannot cause her pain because he doesn't have penile carotenoids.
Mm-hmm.
That really, it's kind of an ongoing theme. I have a later couple that come together. That's a fox and a cheetah. And she has the same, she comes to the same awareness with the fox because the fox also doesn't have penile carotenoids. So it's throwing that whole scene in there kind of helps solidify what's going on with why the felines separated themselves from the humanoids, the more human types, because if they didn't, they would all end up not, breeding naturally because, there's just too much pain. That you avoid the pain response. All creatures avoid pain response. And anyway, that's kind of where that came out. And this is a relatively good passage, like I said, because there's not too many strange words for the software to try to pronounce.
It's interesting to see what the software did struggle with, though. Like the fact that it didn't understand the but as a nervous stutter, it literally went b-but.
Right. Yes.
So it's obviously, AI text to speech kind of stuff still has a long way to go.
It's a long way to go. But you can look, when you're listening to it, I constantly listen to my stuff every day. I've got 22 hours in the book number 1 already. And I keep going through it. It's like, oh, that sounds wrong. Jump into my word software, fix it. It's ongoing because I'm not trying to read it to myself or do dialects necessarily. I'm allowing the software to do that for me and give me the opportunity to become immersed in the text enough that then I can, when I feel something isn't right, I can go back in and change it by just searching for it in the Word document and then addressing it there.
Wild. I use the very basic versions of the text to speech that you were talking about before that are built into our phones and whatever. Just because you're right, you can hear little, in the very robotic voice, you hear major issues, but it helps when I had the word retuned and I needed the word returned, and no spell check noticed it. None of my test readers noticed it. It was one letter wrong, but nothing was picking up on it. My grammar software didn't pick up on it. But when I heard my robotic voice go retuned, and I was like, that's not the right word at all.
Right. And you have things like half the time it'll pronounce bow as in archery as bow as in boat.
Right. Yes.
So it's not perfect by any stretch, but it does help so much in catching so many different things. Once you know that it's always going to pronounce bow as bow, then you can turn that out and go on to the fact that it's now pronouncing what's a good one? I can't remember right if there was something I had to change recently that was instead of tear is a TEAR, tear, it would pronounce it as tear. I had to respell it globally as TEIR, as in shelf, just so that it would pronounce it correctly while I'm listening to it. So yeah, it's not perfect, but boy does it help in catching things.
And thank you for sharing with us this much more high level reading software, because I've only ever heard the very robotic one. So that was quite an experience.
This one actually is very good. It has it has kind of robotics. It has robotic ones it uses. Then it has ones that are taken from Google Speak directly from the network, and then will also allow you to use Amazon Polly, which is even better. So, but you have to pay for Amazon Polly, and I'm cheap. So I use network versions, and this I happen to like this particular voice And if you're writing towards you're wanting your work to have more of an Indian audience, it has Indian voices. It has the dialects can change, and it will actually read other languages as well. So if you write something in Russian, it will pronounce it in Russian.
Wow.
If you set it up correctly, anyway.
Cool. Wow. Amazing. Oh, Alex, we lost.
So Alex's message saying that she's got to go, but thank you very much.
Okay. Okay.
So perhaps we can get Alex back another week. That'd be really good.
Yes.
To him. Yeah.
I'll send them a message. But that was great, Brian, and thank you for sharing erotica. We love erotica. The queer book that I talked about it's made several people uncomfortable. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, well, people will always be uncomfortable with natural things. I don't try to make it as an entirely. I'm not shooting for porn necessarily, but what is happening in the minds of the people who are engaging in these acts, and why is it happening, and how does it feel? I have another bit that goes into some of the psychology of it, because shortly after this incident, the two characters here, these are the two main characters, end up in a mind link, and as a permanent mind link, and they don't know about it until they get to this next phase, and then there is another bedroom scene there where the mind link is important. But in every case where these are happening, they're just not, we're jumping behind some bushes. There's a reason for the erotica that if you just said, well, they went to bed, would be boring. Because there's a lot more that happened within that time frame other than they went to bed and they got up. So that's why I don't think I could write anything that didn't have a certain amount of erotica to it, unless it was a child type story.
So okay, I'm gonna step in there. So I write books that are aimed at young adults and above, and that series has zero erotica in it.
Right, and you're right. That should be that way.
Yeah, and I think it just depends on what you're writing, and I think you're right. It has to have a purpose. There's no point just writing it for the sake of having the scene. So if I go with my main character, she just doesn't. It's just not something that she is interested in.
Sure, no, that's the way it should be. I only played that one section just to keep it short. There's more information before and more information after that really make it understandable what's going on here in far more, other than just the sex scene.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that being that it's mature writing, I think that it's going to appeal to a lot of people that don't necessarily fall into adult category. 14-year-old me would have read the shit out of that. I would have read that like mad. 14-year-old me, but I can't say that I'm writing to 14-year-olds. That's not appropriate. However, I would have been all over that at 14.
Right.
I have a couple anecdotes actually relating to that I'd like to share before. Unfortunately, I'm going to need to go in a couple minutes.
That's okay. We're going to hear Chris in a minute anyway, so it's fine.
Cool. But just one thing we're talking about, like how just having sexual content in there. Both of the books that I've written, like Cloak of Blades and the upcoming urban fantasy, both of them do have some sex scenes in them. And when a friend of mine who is asexual was asking for her opinion of the book, and she was like, well, as you know, I'm ace, and so I wasn't really into that part, but that's okay. That's that's fine. But she said something that always makes me giggle, where she was like, I would kind of when I would get to those parts, I would flip through, and then suddenly I realized, oh no, it's plot relevant, and I would have to go back and reread. So I kind of got a kick out of that, and it was also gratifying. Like, yes, it's not completely gratuitous. Insert tab A into slot B. It's there's a plot point to it. There's a characterization point to it. But then the other thing I wanted to point out, just with regards to what you're saying, like when you were 14, when I was selling my book at WorldCon in Chicago last year. A good friend of mine came with me he's a very good salesman. So he was going to try and help me to kind of refine my sales pitch to the Worldcon crowd. And one thing that he would say to people, which always made me chuckle, was like, well, we wouldn't sell this book to a teenager, but this is exactly the sort of book that a teenager would steal off of their parents' nightstand.
Yes.
which put me back to like being a teenager, and where, like, do you guys ever remember Eric von Lustbader, who wrote books like the Ninja? And I remember copies of that getting passed around where someone had bookmarks and highlighters, like, here, skip to these pages, this is where the sexy bits are. So just the thought that, that someone might treat my book in much the same way. It's like, oh yeah, mom and dad bought this. It's like, I'm going to flip through it because it's got spaceships on the cover, and oh my God, they're doing it. So, again, it's not meant for them, but it amuses me to think that scenario might happen.
Yeah, and that's one of the things here that I'm doing too, is because I'm genre bending as much as I can in so many ways. Most furry, erotica, furry, anything is all furry. This has got humans involved, and it changes the dynamic considerably in the way people approach it, because there's such a misunderstanding about how furry culture, if you will, works. And that humans are involved and can be involved, and you just have to build your story, your background to explain why they're involved. And then then it would only be really weird if they weren't involved. So that's where I'm going with this. And then like I said, in a prequel, I have a gay couple, a fox and a barbarian human. In the sequel, I have a pair of a lesbian and a bi woman. And these are both happen to be furry, that end up becoming a part of the family of our main two characters, the human and the human and the furry. And so there's just a lot going on there that I try to express human dynamics in a way that is interesting and can explore things that you couldn't really do with humans and humans, or even furries and furries.
Sure.
So
on that, unfortunately, I'm going to need to bow out. I apologize. Chris, my apologies. I won't be able to hear your section, but I'll be looking out for it.
The comments that pop up on YouTube, it usually takes about 24 hours. If you go watch the video, it'll be available immediately. But the comments that everybody's been leaving and saying how funny this is and whatever, all that doesn't turn up for quite a while. So just want to let you know.
Enough. The last thing I want to do just before I go, were there any other questions that anyone had for me, either in the chat or any of you guys, that I can address before I go?
Tell us one more time the name of your book and where we can get it. How about that for sure?
Okay. A Cloak of Blades. It's under my name, Isaac Scher. And it's the main place to get it right now is on Amazon, either in Kindle Unlimited, or paperback format. I haven't added hardback yet, but I'm considering it. And there is going to be an audiobook version eventually, but that's backburnered for the moment while I'm working on some other projects.
Wonderful. Cool. Excellent. Well, don't forget to come back and visit us. We would love to have you back on here. And thank you so much.
I'm always glad to come back anytime you'll have me.
Anytime.
Have a nice afternoon then, Isaac, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much.
Take care. Brian, Chris, lovely to meet you all as well.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. So, Chris, we're going to hand it over to
patience. Yeah.
Amazing.
And there were four.
And then there were four.
Indeed. This is one of the difficulties about doing a show that's across the globe. Obviously people have their own time scales and events that are going on in their world. So, and one of I think the Alexander, his phone overheated. So it's always trying to juggle it, but we always welcome everyone coming back and visiting us and being a returning guest author. So anyway, I'm gonna hand it over to you now, Chris. You can take it away.
Yeah, so it was really interesting listening to some of that stuff there about writing for the ear, because that's something that I don't do. So it was incredibly useful to hear some of the different things that were going on with that kind of a process. For me, I write very much for the reader, for text. And I think part of that is because I enjoy reading text myself, and it gives me the chance when I'm seeing something of a page, when I see the marks that are there on a page, and I'm reading through each sentence, each paragraph, each page, each chapter, and that helps me to create the images in my own mind, to sort of hallucinate, I suppose, as I'm reading the story through, and it becomes very, very vivid. And so that's what I try to do when I write. And so I've got some passages from the book, my first book, Dreams, which I'm going to be reading through to you in just a moment. And I'll start with chapter 1, and then I'm going to go into chapter 2. They're quite short chapters. And what I hope you'll get a sense of here is a little bit of contrast in the writing. In the first chapter, it's just setting the scene. And you'll see, hopefully you'll hear some pretty vivid depictions of the setting. And then we go into a second chapter with different characters, and it's much more snappy. There's more in the way of dialogue, and the flow is much, much quicker. There's a real tempo coming into play with that. So just a little bit to explain the situation. You'll hear a bit from the two main characters. First of all, in the first chapter, which is very much establishing the scene and the setting, she's something of a mystery woman. And that's really the theme, the motif that's going on through the book is, who is this person? What's the story? What's going on with this character? And you get a sense of that from the very beginning. And a lot of it doesn't get answered until quite close to the end. So much so that at the beginning, she doesn't even have a name. She's just known as the woman. The name comes reasonably quickly after that in a few chapters' time. And then we meet one of the other main characters, Hugo. And he's somebody who's had a pretty difficult background to begin with in his early years. He's only 18. And then we find that he's about to go to university, or he's just at university, and his character arc goes upwards. And then when the dreams kick in much later, it begins to go downwards a little bit. So we'll see how this goes. I'll just read through certainly the first chapter and, well, a little bit of the second chapter. We'll see how that goes. Just give me a minute to get there. Okay. Chapter 1. She closed her eyes as a breath of wind kissed her cheek. The evening was warm and replete with kind comforts. Insects hummed their busy tunes in the meadow's long grass and wildflowers. Birdsong played like a symphony from the hidden depths of the bramble thickets. And in the distance, the faint sound of church bells drifted across the landscape, their ghostly toll complementing the evening melody of nature. Deep in thought, she sat on the grass and gazed at the stream, its languid flow enchanting her. Eyes wide and semi-hypnotized, she watched as a pair of dragonflies passed across her line of sight, chasing each other like courting lovers. Suddenly, a small fish, perhaps a minnow, broke the surface and rolled before disappearing beneath shifting glints of sunlit water. Yet the woman barely noticed nature's circus tricks and playful games. Instead, her blue eyes remained fixed in a forward focus, mesmerized by the ceaseless flow of the stream. The meadow was a beautiful spot all year round. The balmy days of summer had given way to autumn, but the vicinity's radiance was undiminished on a mild evening like this. She gazed up at the boundless blue expanse above her head, its shade now deepening in the fading light. Like a spotlight low on the horizon, the lingering sun illuminated the meadow and drenched it in a honey-sweet golden hue. On the bank of the stream, between the bulrushes, a spider's web sparkled as it caught the sunlight and shimmered in the lazy breeze. As she pondered the meadow's natural artwork, meditating on its serene splendor, time itself seemed to melt away into the evening stillness. This was the woman's private place. She didn't own it, for the meadow was common land, yet no other folk ever seemed to venture there. The overgrown footpaths guarded a secret paradise long since forgotten by the dog walkers and blackberry pickers of the Kentish Weald. Each visit offered her solitude, and she would sit, sometimes for hours, and allow her thoughts to swirl in a maelstrom of aching memories. For the meadow's peace contrasted with the tempest that howled in her mind. A storm that ravaged her senses, it was the tumult she tried to escape from, the despairing echo of her past. She held a spliff to her lips, struck a match, and took one very long drag. Her eyes closed as relaxation flooded her body and mind, soothing her thoughts almost instantly. The anguish was still there, spinning and churning in her head like cement in a mixer, but the drug provided a hazy veil that made it feel remote and detached. How had it come to this? She was 32 years old, but like the terrifying lunge of a ghoulish black shuck, her past still warped her life into a waking nightmare. What had she done to deserve it? Each day, those terrible memories pounded away at her psyche. If sanity was the dam that held back a reservoir of madness, it felt like the walls were about to be breached. And cannabis was her prime weapon in the fight to remain sane. the only thing that could help shore up that straining, crumbling structure. What a paradox, she thought, that a drug used to craze the mind should instead be employed as a fortress, the last line of defense against the dark spectre of insanity. It was an unenviable dichotomy, and one that she hated. But at least it offered her some solitude, and she was not in a position to refuse that smallest of mercies. The poor dejected woman felt her eyes begin to well. Nevertheless, when the tear broke ranks, she did not move to wipe it. Instead, it rolled down her cheek, pausing for a moment at the bottom of her chin, and before dropping to the earth like a hesitant skydiver leaping from a plane. She took another drag on the spliff, a shorter one this time. As she exhaled, she let go a sigh that hinted at her sadness and wandering melancholy. For the secrets she kept were so twisted and rotten that they must always remain guarded from the scrutiny of others. And yet they were forever with her, pervading her thoughts like an invasive, smothering illness. Inside, she felt her usual stoicism eroding. The time had come to stop this parasite from feeding on her emotions any longer. As the shadows lengthened that evening, her feelings darkened in a mirror image of the physical world around her. Her cannabis-induced high could not shield her forever. The whirlpool of torment began to rotate as her blurred mind struggled to make sense of her eternal musings. All she could discern was the ever-creeping tide of depression, its hands clasped tightly around her throat. And it appeared this dark assailant was finally to be the architect of her demise, that she would at last succumb to its asphyxiating grip. She felt weak and unable to fight anymore. Her mind and body conveyed a willingness to capitulate. Fluent thoughts began to race inside her otherwise clouded mind with a breathtaking clarity. She could not, she would not live like this any longer. It was time to escape her secrets. It was time for decisive, ultimate action. As she contemplated release from the pain, a brief anticipation enveloped her. Alone in the meadow, her suicidal thoughts crystallized. It was getting dark, and the twilight chorus played like music in her ears. Encased in the dim weariness of an emotional prison, she lay down and rested the back of her head on the grass. With thoughts of impending oblivion still whirring through her mind, she closed her eyes and drifted into a restless, dope-fueled sleep. I'm going to read some of chapter 2, but it's getting dark here in England. I need to turn the light on. Give me 1 minute.
No worries. Go ahead.
No worries.
I can see the page a little bit better now.
You totally got in the darkness. It was crazy.
I know. It was getting dark on the page. It was getting dark in my room. What was that all about? Okay, so that's a neat little break, actually. So that's what I call a lyrical chapter there, is trying to paint a picture. And when somebody's reading that, I hope they sort of visualize things in their own heads. And this chapter is a little bit snappier. This is Hugo, the other main protagonist, and he's having a chat with his dad. Professor Rupert Swan sat with his legs crossed. Even after a hard day's work, the psychiatrist retained a dignified posture as he relaxed in the living room of his Ealing home. On the little table next to his armchair was an elegant-looking crystal-cup whiskey glass. The handsome receptacle was a quarter filled with brown liquid, dark brown to be precise. The whiskey it contained had been matured in its barrel for a long time. It was a good whiskey, a very good one. Swan was a man with high standards, unprepared to compromise on quality. His Edwardian three-bed London semi was furnished to the highest standards of upper-middle-class taste and discretion. The room's dominant feature was the original cast-iron fireplace, painted black. Above it hung an elegant mirror that complemented the charm of a building constructed in 1909. His television was smaller than average and was relegated to the corner to avoid dominating things in the way they too often do in less discerning abodes. 11 years earlier, Swan had agonized over whether to carpet his home or install oak flooring. In the end, he opted for carpet, deep cream in colour, and it remained pristine to this day. A quick look at his watch told him it was 9:30. Uncrossing his legs and relaxing deeper into his chair, he took hold of his whiskey and moved it towards his lips. Immediately, a shrill noise made him jump. A small amount of liquid spilt from his glass and into his lap. The professor glanced angrily at his iPhone, as if the device itself were to blame for intruding on his peaceful evening with its impertinent blaring. His first thought was to ignore it, so he dabbed at the wet patch between his legs and took another sip of whiskey. But despite being aggravated, something inside urged him to check who was phoning. So he flicked his eyes to the screen and read the name. His mood changed instantly. It was his son calling. "Dad, it's me." The voice was timid but had a caring softness about it. "Hugo!" boomed the professor, rising to his feet and grinning at hearing his son's voice. "How have your first couple of weeks been? Oxford's treating you well, I trust?" "Well, it's hard work, Dad, but I guess that's what I'm here for. It's good fun too, though. I'm enjoying it." The pair had conversed only via text in the first fortnight of Hugo Swan's new chapter as an 18-year-old undergraduate at Oriel College, Oxford. Their relationship would be fraught at times, and Hugo had been putting the phone call off. Now it was happening, the teenager knew his father would take control of the conversation. "Superb!" exclaimed the older man. "And tutorials are going well, I trust?" "Absolutely fine. In this morning's, we're glad to hear it," said Swan, somewhat dismissively and without the faintest flicker of interest in the content of Hugo's English tutorials. He was far more keen to discuss other aspects of his son's first couple of weeks at university. "Clubs and societies. Tell me which ones you've joined then." The haughty man sank back in his seat and began to reminisce. "Yes, I remember my days at Cambridge. Within 20 minutes of arriving, I joined the boat club, the cricket club, and the college rugger team. Those were the days, all right. God, I miss them sometimes. Well, boy, speak up. What clubs and societies have you joined?" Hugo's stammer indicated he had little to share with his father in that regard. Nervously, he attempted to dodge the question. "Well, I've been very busy with work, and..." "You mean you haven't joined any sports clubs?" Swan's mood had changed again, this time to one of frustration. He jumped up from his seat and threw his free hand back into the air in irritation, narrowly missing the cut-glass chandelier-style light fitting that hung from the centre of his living room. "What the devil's wrong with you, boy? University's meant to be an all-round experience." Hugo squirmed on the other end of the line. "Like I say, the reading list is very long, and we have deadlines every..." "Debating. That's what you need if you want to be a barrister. Make sure you join the debating society. You're lacking confidence, lad. Sharp thinking and confidence. Precisely the skills you're going to need in the courtroom one day. Debating will help you acquire them. Are you listening, Hugo?" Hugo was thankful he was talking to his father on the phone and not via FaceTime. He rolled his eyes, then silently puffed his cheeks as the old man exhorted. In fact, Hugo had never wanted to be a barrister at all. A career in law didn't interest him. And besides, he knew he possessed nothing of the ruthlessness required for success in that profession. Instead, Hugo dreamed of becoming an English teacher. In his mind, it was the natural ambition, given his love of literature and caring disposition. The psychiatrist, however, so keen to live vicariously through his son, had initially torpedoed the idea. "I have a Gray's-Inn friend," Hugo remembered his father announced during his lower sixth year. "I'm sure he'll be able to sort you some work experience in chambers." Nevertheless, Hugo had persisted cunningly. He had told the medic he had aimed to secure a position in one of London's most prestigious schools, Westminster or Harrow perhaps. He had even hinted at becoming a headmaster one day. Indeed, his lies had resulted in partial success. Whilst Hugo would, in truth, have preferred an obscure career making a difference to the lives of state school pupils, Professor Swan had gradually warmed to the idea of his son rising to the very top in private education. Still, the legal profession was never too far away from the psychiatrist's mind, especially when he had a whiskey in his hand. Hugo, as usual, was forced to play along. "Actually, Dad, there's a public speaking competition coming up at Oriel," he lied, knowing it would calm his capricious father's exasperation. "I was thinking of entering. It can't hurt to give it a go." "Well, that's just excellent," beamed Swan as he settled back down in his chair. Again, he reached for his glass, but this time he swirled the contents before taking a sip, then stole a moment to appreciate the decorative shadows cast on the ceiling and walls by the soft glow from the light fitting. "Now then," he cried, keen to sniff out the real gossip, "how are things going with the fillies?" "The fillies?" "The women, Hugo." "Oh, I see. Good Lord, the man must be on his second whiskey." "I'm asking whether you've found yourself a girlfriend yet." "Well, you need to find yourself a girlfriend, lad. University is a preparation for life, as much as about getting a degree, you know." Hugo prepared himself for another rambling monologue. "Yes, back in my day, we all had a splendid time. Lord knows how we ever made any of our morning supervisions, but we worked just as hard as we played, to be fair. In fact, the girls were the ones who kept us on the straight and narrow, made men of us. As for you, Hugo, well, I suppose you'll just have to do your best, won't you? You might have failed with the girls at school, but you can at least make some effort now you're at Oxford." Hugo allowed the mark to wash over him and simply waited until his father had ceased pontificating. "But that's what I'm ringing to tell you, Dad. I have found a girlfriend." The professor's jaw hung loose in astonishment. "That was my reason for ringing you. I wanted to tell you I've met someone. Her name's Alice, and she's a very nice girl, an experimental psychology student at Wadham." Hugo's pleasure in informing his father was palpable. Swan's response was one of pride in his son. "I knew it," he exclaimed, wagging his finger in the air. "I knew Oxford would be the making of you." This time he took a big gulp of whiskey before leaning back in his comfortably upholstered armchair. "Well, you'd be sure to bring her for a visit," he said in an almost friendly tone. "Perhaps one weekend, in between assignments, maybe. Obviously not when you're preparing for that public speaking competition you're entering. Might be entering." Hugo couldn't help but roll his eyes again. "It's only an option at this stage, Dad. Maybe I'll do it, maybe not. Whatever. The point is I want to meet her sooner rather than later." One weekend then, as you suggest. Excellent, man. Well, you enjoy yourself. And good luck with the public speaking, Swan said dismissively, urging his son off the phone so he could return to the remnants of his whiskey. Oh, one more thing, Dad, said Hugo before the medic could terminate the conversation. What's that? Nothing really. It's just been good to hear your voice again, that's all. Yeah, yours too, was all that was offered in return. A curt click indicated his father had hung up. That's about a third of the way through the second chapter, but I'll finish there. Don't want to bore everybody. I think you could probably tell that's much more written for people who are readers rather than listeners. So I definitely have in mind people who buy a physical copy of the book, although perhaps an audible book will come one day. And I certainly don't have Isaac's voice acting skills, but perhaps somebody like Isaac could, I don't know, maybe have the contract or something like that and do the
teamwork.
reading.
Yeah, no doubt. I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something about that you use the word lyrical, and I feel like that both chapters were very, very poetic. That's the way I felt that the whole way through. There was a little alliteration. There were you used multiple words that had similar definitions to reiterate points. And, I thought it was great. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I did try. It's interesting you say that, because I did try to capture something of the poetic in this novel, and I didn't read it at the beginning, but there is a little excerpt of poetry which I've got in there. There was a 17th century Restoration poet called John Wilmot, Earl of Rochester. He wrote quite bawdy poetry, actually, and I'm just going to read you 4 lines that I think encapsulates the book, particularly as the book develops and some of the mystery begins to travel later in the book. And this is an excerpt from a poem, a long poem called A Ramble in St. James's Park. And it says, when leaning on your faithless breast, wrapped in security and rest, soft kindness will my power move, and reason lay dissolved in love. And I think if you read back, if you read that back after reading the book, I think quite a lot will be revealed in that passage.
Yeah.
Do you have that poem at the end of the book again also, so people are sort of recommended to read it?
I don't actually. Maybe that's something I should put in, because what I haven't said yet, and I mustn't give too much away here, but there's a real reflection in the last chapter or 2, let's say, of the first chapter. Is holding a mirror up very much to that first chapter with what goes on and how the book's brought to a close. So I should perhaps have got maybe a second episode, maybe the next few words of that poem in at the end.
It's an interesting idea. I quite like it when books have a little bit of poetry or verse at the very beginning. It kind of sets the scene a little bit. I have that in my books as well. I think sometimes some authors stick them in because it's like they feel like they have to, because it increases the value of the book somehow. And I have read books with that in it, and I'm like, I don't see the connection between the poem and the book itself. But I like it when you've got a thought put into that first bit of poetry.
It really
kind of leads nicely.
Yeah.
It really does. Especially like what Alan suggests, it's a great idea. It's having a bit more of the poem, or have it at the end, or even an explanation or something.
Even just a section of it refrained at the end, just to
Well, about halfway through, the mystery character, she has a name by that point, in case anybody's interested in. I probably won't reveal the name just yet, but what I will say, I have a scene where she's in St. James's Park in London. You notice it was called A Ramble in St. James's Park, and I have her rambling to the park's exit. So there are 1 or 2 bits and pieces to hark back.
Nice. Yep.
That's really cool. I love it. I really liked, especially I really liked the first opening bit of chapter 1, where she's standing by the stream and you're describing what she's doing and what the stream looks like and her thoughts and things. I think that was really, it really does open the book nicely. I think I might be wrong, but it feels almost like it's setting the reader up to something that the reader thinks might be a nice, pleasant book, but then it's going to go horribly wrong.
Well, I'm going to say no comment and make a massive comment.
Yeah, it's fine. We don't mind spoilers here.
We do love spoilers. That's true. We do love spoilers.
Yeah. But we appreciate authors don't always want to share, which is also cool as well. But yeah, I just feel like she's been set up for a very big fall. And there's this almost like this juxtaposition of serenity, and then it's just going to go horribly wrong somewhere. Yeah.
Another contrast that goes through the book, because that setting which you saw there, the meadow, is something that is repeated right through the. It's actually a very important place, and the serenity of the meadow does contrast with the characters. So there, contrast, that serenity. You see this change through the autumn, through the wildflowers, and then the sort of the of the winter months and the sharp frosts or the rain that comes. But it's always about the perfection of nature and how different that is from what's going on in the minds of some of the characters at times, particularly the mystery travel and those secrets that she's got. They get revealed on. You can expect all sorts of cliffhangers going on.
That actually sounds a lot like the way that you talk about your book, Jules. That you have all these monsters that sort of develop through the story, and they reflect and relate directly to your character's struggle or lack of dealing with issues in her mental issues. That's very cool. That's a cool comparison.
Yeah, it's she she has trauma from what happens to her in book 1, and she basically the trauma doesn't get dealt with, and the longer the trauma doesn't get dealt with, the bigger the monsters get in the world that she has to fight. And they're real monsters. So like in her world they actually exist, but they are literal metaphors for her inner demons. They do get bigger and bigger and more scary. So I think it's quite nice stuff like that in books. I like the link to nature as well. It's quite fascinating.
Go ahead, Brian.
The idea of poetry, I've thrown a couple of things, not really thrown in there because they're important throughout the whole series. Some poetry that I just did because it needed it there, and I really didn't have anything to match it to. But I also, one of the other things that's mentioned here is the kind of the repeating themes. I have a variety of Chekhov's guns that keep showing up all the time. That something, the protagonist will do something, usually very violent, and at some point down in the story, it happens to him in almost exactly the same way. So there's always this karmic loop going on with him, and his trying to deal with his own very violent demons. So at the start, he ends up killing some bandits, and the way he ends up doing that, he ends up almost dying from being attacked by some other bandits. So so there's that karmic loop. And with the poetry, there's a series of poems that kind of feed through the entire storyline up until the very end, which I've already written to kind of catch up to eventually, where the protagonists basically ascend to demigodhood. It's not really that, but it's the best way to describe it. And it comes back to the very first poem in the very first book, and how they came up with the ability to be where they are at the end after they die. Nice. So, so there's that. I don't know how long we're supposed to go on this, but
I think we're coming up here on the end right now. Yeah. Thank you so much for both being here and sticking with it. And we're sorry some folks had to leave a little early, but this was great.
We'll invite them back on again. And you two are also very welcome to join us again. Just before we do go, we've got a couple of remarks on in the chat that Ellie's put. Ellie's been very active in the chat, which is awesome. They've put this one here. Hang on.
I'd like to say Ellie's actually going to be a guest on the show. I don't have the date in front of me, but she's coming on to join us as a guest at some point. Which is
that's cool. So Ellie says, that's cool about the dialects in different languages.
Related to your software you were talking about, Brian. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then great descriptions, and then we've got love the lyrical, and then we got I agree that both chapters are very poetic, and loves the poem. And we've got monster/struggle is a cool reflection and metaphor. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Much appreciated. And last one, awesome show.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
You're going to be a guest soon, which is going to be so exciting. Yay.
Looking forward to that very much so, and I hope you've both enjoyed being here as much as we have enjoyed having you here. And like I said, we definitely would love to have you back on here again.
Yeah.
It's been
I sent all of our guests from today our Discord link, so we want you to join our group. It's all just writers and readers, and just it's very small right now, but it's slowly growing. And
Yeah.
There's no toxicity. There's no nastiness. It's a really nice, safe, welcoming environment from people from all different groups and walks in life. And today I've never seen any acrimonious comments. Nothing. No judgment. It's just a really nice, beautiful group of people.
Everybody's very friendly. We've all read other people's work that's already in the group, so yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of shout outs to the Twitter fam.
Yeah,
Mark Ingalls, who does the Weird Cat series. Awesome series. I've read a couple of arcs of his and full books. I love his stuff. And F.R. Coates, also furry author. I've read his series. Now the brain is just dumping. But for Mark and Mr. Coates there and their stories, they're great. They should come on. You should have them on. Invite them in. They're some really interesting things going on.
That'd be great. I'd love to connect with them. Maybe you can send me their links.
Yeah, I can ping you with their links.
That'd be wonderful.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, but stay in touch. Don't disappear on us. You're very welcome to come back on again. And it'd be absolutely delightful to hear more of your work that you've done. Either if it's published or unpublished, it doesn't matter. We love everyone. So I'm going to say fare thee well. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we'll see you same time next week. Bye.
Yay! Thanks.